Greetings and welcome back to the second tag video responses. This one is questions for GMs. Again, this is originally from CondorDM and I've nicked it from Tim Samurai 7 RPG. Okay, so from a GM perspective this time, question 1. What do you call player agency? I've not actually really come across this term before, but I would say player agency is where the players get some control over the game. So it's not just them sitting there while the GM basically says what happens and so forth. This could be as simple as asking, is there a barmaid or a barman behind the bar, man or woman behind the bar, and the GM just going, well, which would you rather it be? You know, whichever, that's what's there. It could be as simple as players asking, can they have something to come up in the game session or during the next, wherever they are in their campaign, so they might be able to buy a certain item that is otherwise difficult to acquire or get their hands on. But it could also be where the player group and the GM work together and the players say, we would like to play this sort of game, these sort of characters, or and the GM works with them to achieve it. So player agency is basically the level of I'm going to say friendly influence and control that the players have on the game, whether during the game or in sort of like campaign determination. Question 2. What does railroading mean to you? If you do apply it, if not, can you say why? As I said in the previous video, to me, railroading from my point of view is you have a campaign, an adventure path or what have you. It starts at point A, it goes to point B, to point C, to point D and onwards. But you allow players the opportunity, the time, the space to actually go off and do things by themselves that might not be covered in the campaign, so that at least they have the freedom within the story that's being told to attempt to try other things and do their own side of it. The bad railroad is where it just goes from A to B to C and so on, and the players get no option to do anything but tell that story. 3. How does it feel for you when you have a bad session? When we have a bad session, I actually do feel a little bit put out, primarily because I like to think that I try hard and work hard to ensure that the players get a fun game out of it and nobody's time has been wasted. But it all depends on what's caused the bad session. If it's a simple case of a character's died, that can sort of like drop the fun value for everybody. If it's a case of players are being argumentative or annoying, there's not a lot you can do about that really. But whatever happens, if we have a bad session, then I feel bad because on some way I feel that I've let the group down or what have you. But again, it depends on the situation and what has happened. Question 4. How do you handle bad players? What are some ways you would describe the behaviour of a bad player in your view? To me, bad players are people who aren't there to enjoy the game. You've got a story that you're telling through this campaign that you're doing, and that particular player is always trying to rail against it. They don't want to know. They think you're forcing them into one thing. Well, you joined up to the campaign. It's people who are rules lawyers and don't accept that the GM needs to sometimes shift things from a little bit from how it's presented in the book in order to make a certain situation more interesting. People who over-optimise. I'm not an optimising GM particularly. I like encounters to be fun and fair. You can't necessarily do that when you have somebody in the group who is overdoing it, and it's basically allowing that one person pretty much to trounce all the encounters. And then of course you have cheats and so forth. The only way really you can do this, because I'm not really in favour of basically just going, right, kick somebody to the curb sort of thing. You've got to sort of like take them to one side, away from the game, down the coffee shop or the pub or whatever, and just go, look, we have a problem and it needs to be, dealt with. Do it calmly, politely, and just try and explain the point of view. Because I think most people will probably turn and go, right, yeah, maybe I'm being an arse. I'll try and tone it down. I have had a player who refused to do that, and over the course of about a year, they really did sort of like ruin the game to the point that the other players were not happy about it. In the end, real life basically took him out of the game. But if it hadn't got to that point, I probably would have been forced to ask him to leave the group. But that's a last measure. I think you need to talk to people politely, calmly, and just sort of try and reach a middle ground. Question 5. What's a good player in your opinion? What are some of the things good players do? Okay, this is probably where people are going to disagree with me a little bit. To me, a good player is somebody who understands that there is a commitment to the game. Because the GM is putting a lot of pardon me, time, money, sweat, tears, blood, effort into doing this. The least you can do is make the effort to be there. Real life gets in the way, but you need to make the commitment to the game. A good player doesn't argue. They query once, and if the GM says this is how this is happening in this situation, you accept it. A good player also does things outside of the game. They're always looking at how they can improve their gaming. They're always, they're doing something. Whether it's they're getting a miniature for their character and painting it up, so there's something of that player in the game. Isn't just them sitting at the table. A good player turns up to tell the story. They're not there to cause a nuisance. They're there to tell the story that the campaign is about, and they get into it and they work together with the other players to ensure everybody has a good time. Question 6. How do you handle splitting up a group? If you do, if you're not, can you say why? What I tend to do is go, right, I'll leave it to the players. If they want to split up, they can do. But I ask everybody what it is that they're doing, where they're going, and then whichever the events would occur first, I deal with them. And then I go around the table to the various until we've completed it. Sometimes this will mean that one set of players will get more time than the others, but that's the downside of the party splitting up. Preferably I would rather characters didn't split up, but in my experience as well, they only really split up when they're in town. Once they go into dungeons and things, that's it. They are they're quite tightly knit together, and they don't wander off or try and do anything like that. Question 7. What do you prefer more? Interaction, roleplay, combat, puzzles, traps, or a mix? From the GM perspective, I like there to be some roleplay. I like there to be some combat. I'm not a fan of puzzles, mainly because I just think they're cheap and tacky. Traps, fine, they're part of the game. So I like a mix. Same as when I'm playing. Question 8. Do you tinker with the rule set you use or use it as written, and would you please explain why? I generally don't play with the rule set. The only things that I would like to do with Pathfinder is to... Well, I've stopped doing it now because of the amount of Pathfinder Society we play. But normally I always do a natural 20 is a success, natural 1 is always a failure on any roll. Because I always think that there is the possibility that you can blag your way through something, and always a chance that no matter how good you are, you can always fluff it up. The other thing I would like to get rid of is attacks of opportunity, because they just favour players rather than the opponents as well. But in general, I don't change the rule system. I don't alter it. It essentially means everybody's on the same page, and if you get new players turn up, then you're always on the same. Again, they haven't got to try and adapt anything. Question 9. Do you mind running NPCs with a group of player characters? I don't mind, but I have the same problem I think that Tim mentioned, that sometimes they get forgotten, or it's very difficult to keep that NPC's knowledge and the information on what the players to learn separate. Sometimes NPCs seem to know far more than they should do. It's also very difficult at times not to Mary Sue them, because you want to have a cool NPC, but you don't want them basically running roughshod over the party. So I would rather there wasn't a group of NPCs with them, and if they do, I tend to make them fade into the background a little bit. Question 10. Thoughts on campaigns and one-shots? Do you prefer one more than the other, or fine with both? Just as I said on the Players Tag video, I would rather run a full campaign rather than a one-off. One-offs we tend to do for like Halloween or Christmas when we can't get everybody together. That's fine, but I like the campaign because you get an overarching story and it makes more sense and there's more fulfillment in the long run. Question 11. How much fantasy versus realism do you apply in most of your games? I actually prefer a little bit more realism in some things. I know it's a fantasy game with swords and dragons and so on, but as I have mentioned in the past, I do think sometimes the worlds of D&D and Pathfinder are just a little too fantastical at times. I try and find a nice middle ground, really, so that you can have the funky magic and still feel like you're in a Western medieval society. Question 12. Do you prefer running modules, hacking modules, or running your own story? Years ago I used to write lots of my own stuff. These days I just find it's easier to have published material. I tend to run adventure paths and publish campaigns. It's a lot more time saving, and I seem to have lost the knack of writing them as well. Also, the downside for anything published, though, I find, is they never seem to be written for a balanced party. They always seem to be written, I don't know how these designers and authors write their things, but it never seems to fit very well for the kind of the randomness that you can find in a gaming group. You know, a random mix of party or and skills and abilities. I won't say that they tend to be generic, but I tend to think they focus more on a much higher plane. I think they tend to expect a more optimised group than you probably will get. So I generally find that whatever you do, if you're using anything that's of published nature, you do have to basically tweak it somewhat. Question 13. What gaming system has gotten you the best results? Tell us about it. Pathfinder. Hands down. It has become for me what D&D always has been. It's a far better system. Not sure what else I can say about that. I've had more fun running Pathfinder than I have any other game system. Hands down. Question 14. What method has gotten you the best results? Tell us about it. I'm not, again, sure what this question is asking. As a GM, this is how I'm going to do it. As a GM, I like to have a campaign worked out in advance. I like to know where it starts, where it ends, and what's in the middle. But I like players to be able to have the freedom to do what they want between that. So that they still turn up to tell the story, but they also get their own interests and desires in there as well. I like to try and, how to put it, not focus quite so much on dice rolls, or I condense them somewhat. As I mentioned earlier, if you've got a clue to be found or something like that, then if they're not in the middle of a fight or anything, let them find it. A little bit more openness in that, rather than forcibly doing the old way of rolling for everything. I think makes a much more enjoyable game. Also, listen to what your players are doing, because sometimes they come up with a far better idea than you've got, or what was in the scenario, and you can kind of quietly write that down, run with it. And players tend to actually suddenly become really happy when they think they've worked out what's going on, but in fact you've taken their idea and are running with it. Little things like that, little GMing hacks, I think tend to give me the best results. 15. What got you into running these kind of games? Well, I answered that on the players video, so I will direct you to that particular question in that vid. And then question 16, who you're tagging, anyone that wants to. Again, this video is from CondorDM, and I've pinched it from Tim Samurai 7 RPG. I'm again interested to see what everybody else puts up, and I'm sure they will be too. So until next time, take care and good gaming.